Hey there, Taylor Elwood here, and today I'm going to be exploring what I'm talking about when I discuss taking magic apart. And the the thing is that when we talk about magic, usually what we're talking about is a combination of things: a spiritual practice, as well as a set of techniques that can be used to alter reality by manifesting probabilities into reality. I mean, that's what we're really looking at. And it's the set of techniques aspect that we're really looking at when we talk about taking magic apart. Now, hello to the person who's watching. Feel free to ask questions at any time or chime in or say hello. So my name's Taylor Elwood, and I am the mad scientist and magical experimenter at magicalexperiments.com. And today we are going to discuss what I mean by taking magic apart. So let's explore that. When I'm talking about taking magic apart, I'm really talking about looking at the practices and the techniques of magic and being able to look at them and say, okay, what could I do to change that practice or that technique? What could I do to take it apart? And what I find is a lot of times you look at your average magic book and you see basically these prefab rituals that have been put together. And it's like, okay, you need a candle for this, you need to say these words like this, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and then something will happen. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And I honestly call this push button magic. This is what I think of as spells, because what you're doing is you're pushing the button and you're hoping that something will happen. And the main problem I have with this approach is that it doesn't do a good job of explaining how and why the magic will work. And if we want to take magic apart, we want to take a magical technique apart, we need to understand what the fundamental principles are that are being used and are at work with this particular magical technique that we're using. So if you hand me a spell, one of the things that I'm going to look at is, with the spells, I'm going to ask myself, what is the spell supposed to do? What's the desired result? And really, why it comes down to that is because in my mind, if you're going to do magic successfully, you need to define your result first. I mean, that's why you're doing magic in the first place, right? So if you don't have a clear understanding of what your desired result is, it's very hard to consequently design a magical working or take one apart, because you're already operating in a place of vagueness. In fact, the principle of results is actually one of the 11 principles. And as I mentioned, one of the points here is that, why magic can be boiled down to 11 principles. Well, what I've found over the years is that there are 11 principles of magic that can basically be used to explain how and why magic works. And the reason why a lot of times people don't have that firm understanding of magic or have the issues with getting results is because they don't know what those principles are. And to be brutally honest, it's not their fault. It's the fault of the people writing books on magic. It's the fault of the teachers. But at the same time, a lot of times I don't think those teachers even know what the core fundamentals of magic are. They've been handed a specific tradition or belief system, and it's taught in a very esoteric way, and there's technical jargon that gets in the way. And what ends up happening is that people are trying to, how does this thing work? I don't know how it works. Just do X, Y, and Z because that's what I've been told to do. Well, that's not a good way to approach magic. I don't recommend it anyway. And what I find a lot of the times is that when people approach magic that way, what ends up happening is that they do get frustrated because they're not getting the results. So let's talk for a moment about what those 11 principles are. And I'm just going to note, if you look in the description here, you can actually learn a little bit about them at the Principles of Magic class, but I'm just going to read them off to you. There's the principle of results. And that's really about defining what the result is. Here's the result that we want. And from defining that result, then we end up defining our magical process. We have the principle of definition, which really examines how we're defining the magical working that we're doing, the context that we're setting things up in, how we're defining each part that's played in the magical working. We have the principle of change/transformation, because look, magic is about change or transformation. You're doing magical working because you want to change something. You see how, now you take a moment and think about it, even with just a surface level examination, you can probably see these principles at work in the magical, your average magical workings. And again, feel free to comment, chime in. I will respond to comments. So if you're watching this, why not? Let's make this a live interactive thing. Then we have the principle of what, where, why, when, and how. And that's really looking at the context of space and time. When do we want this magical working to happen? Where do we want it to happen? When do we want the result to manifest? Why? Why do we want this? How is this going to happen? And what actions are we going to take? Again, this is really about mapping out the magical working and taking a very, admittedly, analytical approach to it. The benefit of taking such an analytical approach, though, is that it really allows you to take apart a magical working in a way that says, aha, okay, this is how all of this is supposed to come together, but it's not coming together. Now I can fix it, or I can personalize it. The principle of need, right? Because magic operates from a place of need, in my opinion. You can feel free to disagree, but in my experience, that's exactly what ends up happening. We have the principle of ethics and morals, which basically is, again, another kind of internal confirmation, and it is what I'm doing in alignment with my ethics/morals. Do I even have an ethical or moral code? Not everyone does, and I'm not going to judge. And we look at the principle of connection. How does all of this actually connect together? Because we need to understand how things connect together. A lot of people say magic is acausal. I disagree with that. Magic is actually very causal. I mean, why are we doing magic? We're doing it to affect a change in the environment. If we don't understand how everything connects together with the magical working, it's like taking a shot in the dark. But when we understand how all the pieces fit together, then what ends up happening is we create a very systematic awareness of what we're trying to do with the magical working. We have the principle of intention, which is really about conscious attention and how conscious attention is focused in order to help achieve the desired result. We have the principle of limitations, and the principle of limitations looks at how to limit what you're doing, how to create form. What I really mean by that is this. When we're doing magical workings, we are taking probability, which has no form but has endless possibilities, and we're giving it a form. We're giving it limitations in order to make it into a reality. There's a necessary exchange that occurs when you manifest a desired possibility into a reality. What you're doing is you're embodying it. You're giving it limitation. That limitation is actually a good thing because it's giving it material form. What I notice is a lot of magicians don't ever want limits. I don't want any limits. I want to be able to do whatever I want. And I get that. But without limits, we wouldn't be able to do the things that we do. So it's just an important thing to keep in mind. Then we have the principle of functions. And the principle of functions just looks at the function of everything. What is the actual function of what it is? For example, if you're working with a spirit, what's the function of that spirit? What is the role of that spirit? What is the purpose of that spirit? And then we look at the principle of mundane actions, and the principle of mundane actions really just necessarily recognizes that for magic to work, one of the things we have to look at is how we map mundane actions to our magical workings. A lot of times people treat magic in a manner where they're like, well, I want it to basically take the impossible and turn it into a reality. And I think that's cool. But you know how you make the impossible into a reality? You also take action in the physical world. And if you don't take any action in the physical world, it just makes it that much harder for something to manifest. I always like to use the example of job hunting. If you don't go out there and send out resumes and go to interviews or things like that, then you're not going to get a job. It doesn't matter how much magic you do for it. Nobody's going to come knocking on your door and say, oh, here's a job. Or maybe they will, but you're still going to have to put a resume out there at the very least. I'll admit, lately, I've been looking for work, and I've had a number of insurance agencies contact me. I don't really want to work for them, but, oh, hey, we saw your resume. I still had to put my resume out there. You see what I mean? And we have the aesthetics of magic, which isn't exactly a principle, but it is about the design of the magical working. What makes a magical working magical? Now, if you're interested in all that, one thing I do recommend is checking out the Principles of Magic class, and the link is in here. And I would also note that we also have the you can also check out the Magical Experiments University, where the principle of magic is just one of the many classes. Now, we've talked a bit about the principles of magic and what they are. What I want to talk about now is what personalizing your magic means, because a lot of people are kind of like, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to personalize my magic? Well, the way personalization works is this. When you have a solid understanding of how magic works, solid foundation, then at that point you can start to approach magic from a plug and play perspective. You can say, okay, there's this ritual that I've done before, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out these components that don't fit. For example, I'm going to pull out, I want to do a working to a pop culture spirit. I'm going to use a classic magical technique, but I'm going to, instead of working with deity X, I'm going to instead plug in the pop culture spirit, and I'm going to take certain other aspects of the ritual and customize it based on the pop culture. That's what I mean by plug and play. That's personalizing your magic. But personalizing can be more than that too. It can also be experimentation. So for example, I've done some sigil magic workings, and doing the sigil magic workings, what I've typically done is I've taken a sigil magic working, and I've done it the classic way, the old wank and fire. But the other thing that I've done is I've taken the idea of a sigil and I said, okay, let's expand this outward. Let's create, for example, a sigil magic working based off comic books. And so I've taken the principles of design with comic books and, one panel here, one panel there, one panel, and put a sigil in each panel, connected them together in order to create a narrative story that then activates each sigil and helps to manifest them into reality. This is an example in this case of personalizing magic, where you're taking something that's actually not even based on that's partially based on magical theory and practice, and partially based on an awareness and knowledge of another discipline, and combining them together. So personalizing your magic isn't always just taking strictly magical stuff and changing it around. Sometimes it's taking things that you already know and asking yourself, how could I apply magic to that? And, sometimes I get asked, what does it take to create a personalized system of magic? Having created a few personalized systems and doing some ongoing work, I'm going to tell you, first of all, it really does boil down to understanding how magic works. And that goes back to those 11 principles of magic. In my experience, once you understand those 11 principles and understand how they come together to create a magical working, then what you have is a process that allows you to develop anything from that, because you have those principles in place and you can start to apply them to any magical working. But beyond that, if you're going to create an overall system of magic, you really need to be able to focus in on what that system is going to do. For example, when I wrote my book, Space-Time Magic, I was describing my system of space-time magic. And what I ended up doing was describing some different experiments and workings that I had done with space-time, and I tied them all together. And then I said, here's this system that you can work with. So, a singular working of magic is not a system. A system of magic is really a collection of workings that have something that connects them together, that have some type of, whether it's a specific topic focus like space-time magic, or it's a focus on working with a given pop culture, or something else along those lines. And so a lot of times when people want to create a personalized system of magic, the question I ask them is, what's your focus? What is it that you want that system of magic to help you do? And and what disciplines are you going to draw on? And yes, disciplines. Some of that's going to be magical disciplines, and some of it's going to be other stuff. And one of the things that people say is, well, I just want to create my own original system of magic. But I'm going to let you know a little secret here. There is no original system of magic out there. Everything is built on the shoulders of what has come before. Like my space-time magic techniques are things that, are based in part on stuff I learned about magic. And it's based in part on on stuff I learned from other disciplines, and I put it together. It's original enough in the sense that, oh, okay, here's these interesting ideas that I've come up with based off research and other stuff, and it's unique enough in that sense. But there's still a reference to something else. A lot of times what I see with people who want to create their own personalized system of magic is they haven't always dedicated the time to learning the foundational practices of magic. And I know that can be a little boring, but I think that if you don't have a solid foundation in place, then what ends up happening is you miss out on a fundamental awareness of how magic works, because you haven't done the work. You don't have the experience. And that's what you need. You need to have some experience at magic. I mean, I didn't, when I started practicing magic at 16, I didn't start experimenting right away. I'd read a few books, did some of the exercises. I probably didn't start experimenting until maybe at least a half a year in, at which point I'd had some experiences. And even then, I didn't really start to experiment until a few years in, when I had spent some time learning stuff. And even now, I'll learn like a new system or practice. Like I've been working with Dojin for a while and learning the practices. Have I done a little bit of experimentation? I have, but for the most part, I've kept it pretty strict to what it is, because, I need to learn it and know it before I just go out there and experiment with it. And this is what I think holds up a lot of people. They don't want to hear this about magical experimentation. They just want to go and experiment and do their own thing. But, there is a necessary foundation that needs to be in place. Okay, so Celine asked, hopefully I got your name right, Celine. What do you do when you're having witchcraft, paganism burnout? Great question. I've actually had that burnout a few times in my life. And what I've done is two things. I've taken a break from the communities that I'm part of, because usually that burnout is part of the community. And, you need a break from those people. And let's be honest here, a lot of magicians and occultists are frankly abrasive assholes. I'm sorry if that comes as a shock to you, but they are. I've been that abrasive asshole. So I'm not saying it as, I'm not pointing my finger at them and not pointing it back at me, because sometimes I have been, and that's just all there is to it. And I own that. So that's one solution. The other thing, though, is that sometimes what I do is I take a back to basics approach, where I just go back to the basics, because sometimes you take what you know for granted. And part of what your burnout is that you're feeling a fundamental dissatisfaction because you've been doing stuff for a while. And what you need to do is come back to it with a sense of awe and wonderment that allows you to appreciate what you're doing with your magical work. And sometimes I just change things up and do something new. So, any one of those solutions can work. And if nothing else, just take a break from magic and paganism for a while. I mean, I went through a period at one point where I took a half a year off and just didn't read anything about magic or paganism. And, I did some daily practices, but I didn't really do anything else. As shocking as that might sound, it was actually a really good thing for me. So those are just some thoughts for you there, Celine, and I hope that helps you. So at this point, if there's any other questions, feel free to ask. I mean, I know I have a few of you here, and I always welcome that. Just to kind of recap, I think that, if you want to take... Oh, you're welcome, Celine. If you want to take your magic apart and turn it into and develop your own personalized magical workings, more power to you. I say go for it. But keep in mind that you do need to have that foundational knowledge. And if that's something that you're looking for, or even if you think you have it, but you want to brush up on it, then I would recommend you checking out, get my workbook, How Magic Works workbook, which is totally free, or check out the Principles of Magic class or the Magical Experiments Universe, which University. Magical Experiments University, you get all my classes, and it's for a low monthly price of $21 a month. So consider checking those out. And with that, I'm going to sign off here. I just want to note that tomorrow night, I will be doing another live stream for Pop Culture Magic. I've decided to basically create a second live stream just for Pop Culture Magic, because there's so much there to explore. And I feel like it's kind of a disservice to either group when I post something that's really just kind of like it could go either way. Not everybody in the Magical Experiments Facebook group wants to learn about pop culture magic, and not everyone in the pop culture magic group necessarily wants to learn about the more general stuff with magical stuff. So that's why I'm doing it. All right, so see you guys tomorrow and take care.